Hey guys, it's Landon from Redefined Horizons and On Point Workshops. This is another fantastic Surveyor short video where we teach you a little something about land surveying or related topic. Today we're going to answer a simple question. Can you survey underwater? Interesting question, right? So we're going to answer that. We're going to let you know. The answer is yes. That's the short answer. Yes, sort of. You can sort of survey underwater. So I want to explain how do we do that. As land surveyors, how do we survey underwater? What are the methods that we use? And then we have some special type of, there's a special type of surveyor that focuses on surveying underwater, and we'll tell you a little bit about those kinds of surveyors. So how do we survey underwater, like under a river or a lake or the ocean? So there's 3 or 4 different ways we can do that as land surveyors. So the first one is we just use traditional survey methods like we would above the water. But we do that at low water. So we do it at low tide, or we do it at low water in the river, or we drain the lake and we do a search. So I've done surveys like that where the client has lowered the lake, and then we go in and we do the survey while the water's low. So that's one way you can do it. So it's not really surveying underwater, but we essentially survey the surface of the water body at low water. So it's cheating a little bit. The second way is what I call prodding or rodding or probing. That's where we essentially take a survey rod. It's like a fancy metal stick, and we actually go out in a boat, or sometimes we get out on a float tube, and we actually put the rod into the water until it hits the bottom of the water body, and then we survey the top of the rod. There's usually a glass, a special type of glass. It's called a prism. And that allows us to determine the location, the horizontal and elevation of that point that's at the bottom of the rod. That is a little bit time consuming. It's typically done in shallower water and areas, smaller areas. And there's a limit to how deep you can use it. You get past 20 or 30 feet deep and it gets hard to control the rod. But we do rivers and ponds and shallow lakes. We can use that method. The third way we can survey underwater, this is relatively new, and I have never personally done this, but there are types of what we call LiDAR, which is like a laser. So LiDAR is typically used to measure the ground, but there are some newer types of more powerful LiDAR now that can actually penetrate shallow water and get what we call a return off of the bottom of the water. So that type of LiDAR is usually flown in an airplane, and it's expensive and it's pretty high powered, but that's another way. If you have shallow water that's adjacent to land, like it's close to the shore, you can use LiDAR to acquire that data. Okay, but the last way I'm going to talk about, the fourth way, is the most common way we survey underwater, and that's with sonar, or what surveyors sometimes call soundings, but it's sonar, so it's echoes, just like they use in submarines. So we have special types of equipment that use sonar to bounce sound waves off the bottom of the river or the lake or the ocean, and then we use that to create a map, essentially. So there's 2 basic types of sonar that we use as surveyors. We use what's called single beam. Sometimes you'll hear it called a single beam echo sounder, and that's usually it mounts on a rod or a pole, and the actual, I can't remember what they call it. I think it's called the transceiver. It's like a big hockey puck. It sits on the bottom of the pole, and that's what sends the pulse of sound out. That's called a single beam because it's just bouncing out one beam at a time. Now it does that many thousands of times a second or millions of times a second, but it's just one beam. The second type is what we call multi-beam sonar. Sometimes you'll hear surveyors call it side scan sonar. And that's just like a bar. It's like a bar with a bunch of those little beams. So hundreds or thousands of them. And so now it's more like a scan. So instead of just like the single beam echo sounders, like sticking a single rod in the bottom of the lake a bunch of times, a multi-beam is like doing that with a bunch of rods, with hundreds of rods or thousands of rods. So you actually get more dense data. It's more dense data coverage. That's called multi-beam. So those are the 2 basic types. Single beam is way less expensive and easier to use. Multi-beam is more expensive and more difficult to use. We take we take those sounders, both kinds. They're usually either towed behind a boat or mounted on a boat or some other type of watercraft. Could be a drone, could be a hydro drone or UAV. But you basically drag it across the surface of the water body. Now, I'm sure there are submersibles that do the same thing in the ocean. I've never used one of those, but I'm sure that's a thing as well. One of the things about what we call hydrographic surveying or surveying underwater is you have to get a continuous survey grade location or an accurate location on the watercraft that is towing or carrying the sounder, either the multi-beam or the single beam sounder. So we usually do that we either have a survey grade GNSS receiver that's on the watercraft, or sometimes we'll mount a prism or more than one prism on there, and we'll survey the prism with like a robotic total station from the shore. But you need good accurate location at the location of the watercraft on the surface, because what we do is we use that for our horizontal position, and then we match that up with the depth that we get from the sounder to calculate the horizontal location and the elevation of the bottom of the water surface. Okay, so I mentioned there's a special type of surveyor that focuses on these types of surveys, and we call them hydrographers. So they're surveyors that spend their careers surveying underwater. And I actually know a hydrographer. His name is Chu. He's a super cool guy. I think he works for the Port of Los Angeles. Like, he's a surveyor, licensed surveyor, but that's what he does. He focuses on surveying underwater for the Port of Los Angeles. So it's a cool job. It's a specialization inside of land surveying. It's kind of like if you're a doctor but you're an orthopedic surgeon. That's a specialization. So that's what being a hydrographer is like. It's also like being a geodesist. It's a different kind of specialized surveyor. I am not a hydrographer. I do sometimes do hydrographic surveys. I don't do them as much as I used to. In the first part of my career, I did more of that. But it's a cool job. If it sounds interesting to you, you should definitely check it out. And sometimes we call those underwater surveys hydrographic surveys, sorry. Sometimes you'll hear them called bathymetric surveys. But the men and women that do those surveys, we call them hydrographers. That's the typical name. So it's interesting. They're land surveyors, but they're not really surveying land. They are, but they're surveying land that's underwater. So that's what a hydrographer does. So there you go. There's the answer to your question today. Your fantastic surveyor short. Can we survey underwater? Yes, we can. Some limitations to that. We have to use some different methods, but we can survey, and we do survey underwater every day. It happens all the time.